So there I was, Captain Jake Morrison, supposedly representing the finest of human diplomacy aboard the luxury cruise ship Galactic Harmony. And let me tell you, if this was humanity's finest, we were all doomed. The ship was a marvel of engineering, assuming you enjoyed the aesthetic of a flying shopping mall crossed with a disco ball. Every surface gleamed with that particular kind of alien chrome that somehow managed to be both blindingly bright and inexplicably purple at the same time. The Galactic Harmony was hosting what the press had dubbed the most important peace summit in galactic history, which was really just fancy talk for let's see if these three species can sit in the same room without declaring war. Our esteemed guests were quite the collection. First, we had the crystalline Vorthak, represented by Ambassador Klaxon, who looked like someone had crossbred a chandelier with a particularly uptight librarian. Everything about Klaxon was sharp angles and disapproving vibrations. The guy, and I use that term loosely, communicated through harmonic frequencies that sounded like a tuning fork having an anxiety attack. Then there were the Molluskans, with Secretary Gloop leading their delegation. Picture a slug the size of a small car, but with the paranoia of a conspiracy theorist who'd had too much coffee. Gloop left a trail of slime wherever he went, and seemed convinced that everything from the artificial gravity to the buffet selection was part of some elaborate plot against his people. Finally, the Zephyrians, led by high buzzer Zitrix, who moved like she'd been injected with pure caffeine and spoke at roughly the speed of light. Imagine a praying mantis crossed with a hummingbird. Now give it diplomatic immunity and a tendency to take everything literally. Zitrix's idea of small talk was discussing the aerodynamic properties of the dinner napkins. The peace talks had been going about as well as you'd expect, which is to say they'd barely managed to agree on what constituted a chair, let alone anything resembling actual diplomacy. Each species had different ideas about everything from basic physics to whether water was wet, and I was starting to think my job description should have included miracle worker somewhere between cultural liaison and professional human. That's when I discovered the cheese. I'd been wandering the ship's exotic food section, which was basically a museum of things that probably shouldn't be eaten but were anyway. The vendors came from across the galaxy, hawking everything from crystallized sunlight to what appeared to be screaming vegetables. And there, sitting in a corner stall like some forgotten treasure, was a wheel of the most beautiful, pungent, blue-veined cheese I'd ever seen. The vendor, a three-eyed creature that looked like it had escaped from someone's fever dream, explained in broken galactic standard that it was fermented Altarian milk root, aged in the volcanic caves of Kepler 442b for exactly 17 local years. The smell hit me like a freight train, carrying a cargo of pure nostalgia mixed with industrial-strength funk. It was perfect. Little did I know that this innocent wheel of fermented dairy was about to cause the biggest diplomatic incident since the Great Pronoun Wars of 2387. But hey, that's what happens when you're just trying to enjoy some quality cheese in a galaxy that apparently doesn't understand the finer things in life. So naturally, I did what any reasonable human would do when faced with 17-year-old fermented space cheese. I bought the entire wheel and decided to debut it at that evening's formal diplomatic dinner. The dining hall was a sight to behold, assuming you enjoyed the sight of awkward cultural tension served with a side of impending disaster. The Galactic Harmony's designers had clearly gone for elegant neutrality, which in practice meant everything was beige and nobody was happy about it. 3 separate tables had been arranged in a triangle formation, because apparently even the furniture was trying to avoid an international incident. Ambassador Klaxon sat rigid as a crystal sculpture, occasionally emitting harmonic hums that I was pretty sure translated to, "This is beneath my dignity." Secretary Gloop had positioned himself strategically near what he probably assumed was an escape route, his eye stalks swiveling paranoidly between the other delegates. High buzzer Zetrix was practically vibrating in her seat, her compound eyes tracking every movement in the room like she was expecting ninjas to drop from the ceiling at any moment. I strutted in with my cheese wheel like I was carrying the Holy Grail, which, let's be honest, I basically was. The thing was magnificent, a proper blue cheese, with veins of mold that practically glowed with bacterial goodness. The aroma preceded me by about 15 feet, and I could see the aliens' various sensory organs twitching as they tried to process what they were experiencing. "Ladies, gentlemen, and distinguished entities of various biological classifications," I announced, setting the cheese down on the central serving platform with the reverence it deserved. "Tonight, I present to you a delicacy from the far reaches of space, aged to perfection, and guaranteed to be an experience you'll never forget." Now, here's where things got interesting. I cut myself a generous wedge, about the size of a small sandwich, and took my first bite, and oh, sweet mother of fermentation, it was glorious. The flavor hit like a tsunami of aged perfection, starting with a gentle tang and building to a crescendo that made my eyes water with joy. My face flushed red, sweat started beading on my forehead, and I may have made a noise that sounded suspiciously like a dying walrus having a religious experience. "Oh yeah," I groaned, taking another massive bite. "That's the stuff right there. You can taste the sulfur from the volcanic caves. It's like a party in my mouth, and everyone's invited." What I didn't notice, being completely absorbed in my cheese-induced euphoria, was the growing alarm spreading across the 3 alien tables like wildfire in a fireworks factory. Ambassador Claxon's crystalline structure began resonating at frequencies that probably registered on the Richter scale. The harmonic vibrations were definitely not saying, "Congratulations on your excellent cheese choice." Secretary Gloop's paranoid eye stalks extended to their maximum length, and his slime production kicked into overdrive as he began sliding rapidly toward what he clearly believed was the nearest exit. High buzzer Zitrix started making rapid-fire clicking sounds that I later learned was the Zephyrian equivalent of Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. I took another enthusiastic bite, and the cheese's intensity ramped up another notch. My face turned an even deeper shade of red. I started making increasingly appreciative groaning sounds, and my body began what could generously be called involuntary celebration movements, but probably looked like I was having some kind of seizure. "This is incredible," I managed between bites, sweat now flowing freely. "It's like my taste buds are being attacked by an army of flavor ninjas, and I'm totally okay with that." That's when Secretary Gloop's paranoid voice cut through the dining hall like a rusty knife through butter. "Assassination attempt! The human has been poisoned! This is exactly the kind of underhanded tactic I'd expect from—" And just like that, all diplomatic hell broke loose. Ambassador Claxon's harmonic frequencies shifted into what I can only describe as accusatory mode, while high buzzer Zitrix launched into a rapid-fire defense that sounded like a machine gun having an argument with a telegraph. Meanwhile, I'm still standing there with cheese in my mouth, trying to figure out why everyone was suddenly shouting about poison when I was clearly having the best culinary experience of my life. Turns out, enjoying fermented dairy products is apparently not a universal experience. Who knew? What happened next could only be described as a diplomatic clusterfuck of truly galactic proportions. Secretary Gloop, in full paranoid meltdown mode, started sliding around the room at impressive speeds while leaving a trail of accusatory slime. "I knew it!" he bellowed, his eye stalks waving like angry periscopes. "This whole peace summit was a setup. One of you crystalline or buzzing conspirators has tried to eliminate the human to frame my people." Ambassador Claxon's response was a harmonic frequency so sharp it probably shattered wine glasses in 3 adjacent solar systems. When the translation came through, it was essentially the diplomatic equivalent of, "How dare you accuse us, you paranoid gastropod? We are beings of pure logic, and would never stoop to such crude biological warfare." High buzzer Zitrix, meanwhile, had gone into what I can only describe as hyperdrive panic mode. She was clicking and buzzing so rapidly that the ship's universal translator was struggling to keep up, producing gems like negative, negative, accusations unfunded, Zipperian honor demands, immediate retraction. Also, why is human still consuming poison? Substance, this makes no logical sense according to basic toxicology. And there I was, still happily munching on my cheese, completely oblivious to the fact that I had apparently become the center of an interstellar incident. The cheese was really hitting its stride now, the kind of fermented perfection that makes your sinuses clear and your soul sing hymns of dairy appreciation. That's when Dr. Tentacleworth burst through the dining hall doors like a 6-armed medical tornado. Dr. Tentacleworth was an Octarian, which meant he looked exactly like what would happen if an octopus decided to go to medical school and developed a serious superiority complex about it. All 6 of his arms were carrying different medical instruments, and his expression was the kind of professional concern that suggested someone was about to get very thoroughly examined, whether they wanted to be or not. "Stand back," he announced dramatically, his tentacles waving medical scanners in all directions. "I am a doctor. Someone reported a poisoning in progress." "That would be me," Secretary Gloop slammed over, pointing an accusing eye stalk in my direction. "The human has clearly been dosed with some kind of biological weapon. Look at him. He's sweating, convulsing, making disturbing noises, and his skin coloration has shifted to an alarming red hue." Dr. Tentacleworth turned his attention to me, and I have to admit, from his perspective I probably did look like I was dying, I was red-faced, sweating profusely, making appreciative groaning sounds, and occasionally shuddering with what I can only describe as cheese-induced bliss. Fascinating, Dr. Tentleworth muttered, running a scanner over me with one tentacle, while taking notes with another, and somehow managing to look deeply concerned with his remaining appendages. His neural activity is highly elevated, his cardiovascular system is in overdrive, and his chemical receptors are firing at unprecedented levels. You see? Secretary Gloop exclaimed, leaving a particularly dramatic slime trail as he gestured wildly. Clearly a neurotoxin designed to overstimulate his biological systems until they shut down completely. Ambassador Claxon resonated at what I was beginning to recognize as his "I told you so" frequency. This is obviously the work of those hyperactive insects. They probably laced the food with some kind of stimulant compound. Absolutely acceptable accusations, High Buzzer Zitrix buzzed indignantly. Zephyrium chemistry focuses on precision stimulants for enhanced productivity, not crude poison delivery systems. Also, the crystalline entities have much better access to exotic compounds through their mineral-based metabolism. Meanwhile, I took another magnificent bite of cheese and nearly transcended to a higher plane of existence. Oh man, I sighed contentedly. This batch has got some serious kick to it. You can really taste those volcanic minerals. Dr. Tentleworth's scanner started beeping frantically. His pleasure centers are showing activity levels I've never seen in any humanoid species. This is either the most sophisticated poison in galactic history, or... He paused, looking confused. Or what? All three ambassadors demanded simultaneously. Or he's experiencing some kind of intense euphoric response to whatever he's consuming, Dr. Tentleworth admitted reluctantly. That's when the ship's security system decided to join the party. Red lights started flashing, klaxons began blaring, and the computer's annoyingly cheerful voice announced, "Attention, possible biological contamination, detected. Initiating calm signal, please remain calm and await further instructions." The dining hall doors slammed shut with the kind of finality that suggested we weren't going anywhere anytime soon. "Well," I said cheerfully, cutting myself another slice of cheese, "this escalated quickly." Just when I thought things couldn't get any more ridiculous, the dining hall doors hissed open and in walked Inspector Whiskers, the ship's chief detective. And yes, before you ask, his name was actually Whiskers. And he was exactly what you'd expect from a cat-like Felinian who'd spent too many years in law enforcement. Picture a 6-foot-tall tabby cat wearing a detective's coat and sporting the kind of world-weary expression that suggested he'd seen every type of stupidity the galaxy had to offer and was thoroughly unimpressed by all of it. His ears twitched with professional irritation as he surveyed the scene. 3 panicking alien delegations, 1 overly dramatic doctor, and me still enthusiastically working my way through what was rapidly becoming the most controversial cheese in diplomatic history. "All right, everyone just calm down," Inspector Whiskers said in a voice that sounded like gravel mixed with disdain. "I've been called in to investigate reports of an attempted assassination via biological warfare. Someone want to fill me in on why the human is still conscious if he's supposedly been poisoned?" Secretary Gloop immediately oozed forward, leaving what I was starting to think of as his signature panic slime trail. "Inspector, this is clearly a case of delayed action toxin. The human has been dosed with something designed to cause maximum suffering before the inevitable fatal conclusion. Look at his symptoms." Inspector Whiskers turned his yellow eyes toward me and his whiskers twitched in what I was pretty sure was the Felinian equivalent of raising an eyebrow. At that exact moment, I happened to take another bite of cheese, and the intensity hit me like a freight train made of pure flavor. My eyes rolled back, I made a noise that probably sounded like I was being electrocuted, and I may have done a little victory dance. "Exhibit A," Secretary Gleep declared triumphantly. "Clear signs of neurological damage and involuntary muscle spasms." Inspector Whiskers pulled out a tablet and started taking notes with claws that clicked against the screen. "Right, and who had access to the human's food?" Ambassador Claxon vibrated at his most indignant frequency. "Inspector, I must protest this line of inquiry. The crystalline Vorthak have no interest in crude biological warfare. Our methods of conflict resolution are far more sophisticated than poisoning someone's dinner. Sophisticated like hiding toxins in mineral compounds that only affect organic beings?" High Buzzer Zitrix clicked rapidly. "The Vorthak have exclusive access to rare crystalline formations that could easily be ground into undetectable powder form and sprinkled onto food substances." "How dare you?" Claxon's harmonic response was so outraged it made the wine glasses vibrate. "If anyone has the means and motive for this attack, it's clearly the hyperactive insects with their advanced biochemical knowledge. Unacceptable slander, Zitrix buzzed at maximum volume. Zephyrian biochemistry is focused on productivity enhancement, not crude elimination tactics. Besides, the molluskins have been acting suspiciously paranoid all evening, which is classic misdirection behavior. Of course I'm paranoid, Secretary Gloop exclaimed, his eye stalks swiveling wildly. I predicted this exact scenario. False flag operation designed to eliminate the human and blame it on interspecies rivalry. Classic divide and conquer strategy. Inspector Whiskers looked like he was developing a migraine, which was impressive for a species that supposedly didn't get headaches. So let me get this straight. Each of you is accusing the other two of poisoning the human, but none of you can explain why he's still alive and apparently enjoying whatever's killing him? Dr. Tentacleworth chose that moment to wave a scanner dramatically. Inspector, my readings show the human's biochemistry is in a state of extreme stimulation, but all his vital signs remain within acceptable parameters. It's almost like his body is processing whatever he consumed as a positive experience, rather than a toxic one. Delayed reaction, Secretary Gloop insisted. The poison is designed to make him feel good before the inevitable collapse. It's the perfect psychological warfare weapon. I decided this was a good time to contribute to the conversation. Hey, has anyone else noticed how the cheese gets better with each bite? It's like the flavor profile keeps evolving. First you get the sharp tang, then the creamy base notes, and finally this incredible sulfuric finish that just lingers on your palate. The room went dead silent except for the sound of Inspector Whiskers' claws clicking against his tablet. Did he just describe the alleged poison as having good base notes? The inspector asked slowly. Dr. Tentacleworth ran another scan. His pleasure response just spiked again. Inspector, I'm starting to think. Don't say it, Ambassador Claxon vibrated warningly. There must be a logical explanation for this apparent contradiction. Inspector Whiskers turned to examine the cheese wheel, his nose twitching as he caught the aroma. What exactly is this substance the human is consuming? Fermented Altarian milk root, I said cheerfully, cutting myself another slice. Aged 17 years in volcanic caves. The vendor said it was a delicacy. A delicacy that's causing him to exhibit all the symptoms of severe poisoning, Secretary Gloop pointed out suspiciously. High Buzzer Zitrix's compound eyes focused intently on the cheese. Fermented products often produce biochemical reactions in various species. What if the human's reaction is not toxic, but rather species-specific enjoyment response? Impossible, Ambassador Claxon resonated. No species could derive pleasure from something that causes such extreme physical reactions. That's when I made what was probably my most dramatic cheese appreciation noise yet. A sound that could only be described as the mating call of a very satisfied walrus. My face turned an even deeper shade of red, sweat poured down my forehead, and I actually had to sit down because the flavor was so intense. Inspector Whiskers stared at me for a long moment, then looked at his scanner readings, then back at me. His whiskers twitched in what I was beginning to recognize as the Felinian equivalent of dawning realization mixed with professional embarrassment. Oh, you've got to be kidding me, he muttered. Inspector Whiskers was staring at me with the kind of expression that suggested he was mentally calculating how much paperwork this was going to generate, and whether early retirement was still an option. His tail was twitching in what I was pretty sure was suppressed feline rage. That's when I finally noticed that everyone in the room was looking at me like I was either dying, insane, or possibly both. The 3 alien delegations were huddled in their respective corners like I was some kind of biological weapon that might explode at any moment. Dr. Tentacleworth had all 6 tentacles poised with different medical instruments, ready to perform emergency surgery, or possibly an exorcism, and Inspector Whiskers looked like he was 2 seconds away from arresting everyone in the room just to make the headaches stop. Ah, I said, pausing mid-chew with a piece of cheese halfway to my mouth. Is everything okay? You all look a little tense. The silence that followed was the kind of profound quiet you usually only hear in the vacuum of space, or right before someone gets thrown out an airlock. Secretary Gloop was the first to break. Okay? Okay? His eye stalks extended to their maximum length and started rotating independently, which I was learning was his species' equivalent of a complete mental breakdown. You've been poisoned with what is clearly the most sophisticated biological weapon in galactic history, and you're asking if everything is okay? Poisoned. I looked down at the cheese, then back at the room full of concerned aliens. This cheese? Are you serious? Ambassador Claxon's crystalline structure resonated at what I was beginning to recognize as his explaining things to idiots frequency. Human Morrison, you have been exhibiting classic symptoms of severe toxicological distress for the past 37 minutes. Elevated perspiration, extreme facial flushing, involuntary vocalizations, and apparent muscular convulsions. And you're still consuming the toxic substance, High Buzzard Zetrix added, her compound eyes tracking my every movement like she expected me to spontaneously combust. This behavior suggests either complete neurological breakdown or some kind of species-specific death wish that we were previously unaware of. I blinked slowly, trying to process what they were telling me. Then I looked down at the cheese in my hand, then back at their terrified faces, and suddenly the last half hour started making a lot more sense. "Oh my God," I said, and then I started laughing. Not just a little chuckle, but the kind of deep, belly-shaking laughter that comes from realizing you've been at the center of the most ridiculous misunderstanding in diplomatic history. Dr. Tentacleworth immediately started scanning me with renewed urgency. The toxin has affected his cognitive functions. He's experiencing inappropriate emotional responses. This is clearly the final stage before complete system failure. No, I managed between fits of laughter. You've got it all wrong. I'm not poisoned. This is just really, really good cheese. The room went silent again, except for the sound of my continued chuckling and the faint hum of the ship's life support systems. Inspector Whiskers was the first to speak, his voice carrying the tone of someone who was beginning to suspect he'd wasted the last hour of his life on the stupidest case in law enforcement history. "Come again?" "It's fermented cheese," I explained, holding up the blue-veined wedge like it was a piece of evidence. "You know, aged dairy products? It's supposed to be intense. The sweating, the facial flushing, the involuntary noises, that's all completely normal when you're eating something this magnificently pungent." "Normal?" Secretary Gloop's slime production kicked into overdrive. "You're telling me that humans voluntarily consume substances that cause them physical distress for recreational purposes?" "Well, when you put it like that, it sounds kind of weird," I admitted. "But yeah, basically. This reminds me of a really good blue cheese from back home. Roquefort, maybe, or a nice aged Stilton. The stronger the better." Dr. Tentleworth lowered his scanners slowly, his expression shifting from medical concern to professional embarrassment. "So, the elevated neural activity I've been detecting." "Taste bud euphoria," I confirmed. "The cardiovascular stimulation is just my body's natural response to really excellent food. And the chemical receptor firing? That's just how humans react to complex flavor profiles." Ambassador Claxon's harmonic frequencies shifted to what I was pretty sure was the crystalline equivalent of mortification. "You mean to tell me that we have mobilized emergency medical personnel, activated quarantine protocols, and launched a full criminal investigation because you were enjoying your dinner?" "Pretty much, yeah." I took another bite of cheese, and once again my face scrunched up in appreciation. Sweat beaded on my forehead, and I made what probably sounded like the mating call of a very satisfied walrus. "See? Completely normal human behavior." High Buzzer Zitrix's rapid clicking slowed to what I assumed was thoughtful consideration. "So when humans consume fermented dairy products, they experience physical reactions that mimic severe poisoning, but they consider this pleasurable." "You got it," I said cheerfully. "The more intense the reaction, the better the cheese. It's like a flavor adventure for your mouth." Inspector Whiskers slowly closed his tablet and looked around the room at the three panicking alien delegations, the overdramatic medical officer, and me sitting there happily eating cheese like nothing had happened. His whiskers twitched once, twice, and then he started laughing too. 37 years in law enforcement," he said, shaking his head. "I've investigated murders, theft, smuggling, diplomatic espionage, and interspecies conspiracy. But this is the first time I've had to solve the case of why someone was enjoying their lunch too much." Dr. Tentacleworth was examining his scanner readings with the kind of fascination usually reserved for discovering new forms of life. "Remarkable. The human physiology actually processes intense sensory input as a positive experience. It's like they've evolved to enjoy things that would be considered torture by most other species." "Hey now," I protested. "Let's not go calling good cheese torture. That's just insulting to the cheese." To prove my point, I stood up and did a few jumping jacks, then recited the first verse of an old Earth song I remembered from childhood. "See? Perfectly healthy. No neurological damage, no system failure, no biological weapon. Just a guy who really, really loves fermented dairy products." The three alien delegations stared at me like I'd just performed actual magic, which, I suppose from their perspective, I had. After all, I'd apparently survived what they considered a lethal dose of biological warfare, and was now doing calisthenics while singing children's songs. "So," I said, settling back down with my cheese, "anyone want to try some? I promise it won't actually kill you, even if it might feel like it at first." The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge, and I could practically see the mental gears turning in each alien's head as they processed what I'd just proposed. Here was this substance that had convinced them I was dying, and now I was casually inviting them to experience it themselves. Secretary Gloop was the first to respond, his eye stalks retracting slightly as paranoia warred with curiosity. You want us to voluntarily consume what we just spent the last hour believing was a lethal biological weapon? Think of it as a trust exercise, I said cheerfully, cutting 3 small pieces from the cheese wheel. Besides, if we're going to have a successful peace summit, shouldn't we be willing to share potentially life-threatening experiences together? Ambassador Claxon's crystalline structure vibrated at what I was learning to recognize as his considering ridiculous human logic frequency. There is a certain diplomatic precedent for shared risk as a bonding mechanism. The ancient ritual of salt sharing among the Terran cultures, for instance. Except salt doesn't make you look like you're having a religious experience mixed with a medical emergency, Inspector Whiskers pointed out dryly, but I noticed his whiskers were twitching with what might have been amusement. Eyebuzzer Zitrix had gone into rapid calculation mode, her compound eyes focusing and refocusing as she processed the social implications. Anthropological studies suggest that shared consumption of culturally significant foods creates interpersonal bonds through synchronized biochemical experiences. If humans derive pleasure from substances that cause apparent distress, participating in this ritual could demonstrate cross-species understanding and acceptance. Plus, I added, holding up the cheese pieces, you've all been so worried about me for the past hour. This is your chance to find out what all the fuss was about. Dr. Tentleworth had been quietly running calculations on his scanner. From a medical standpoint, the human has demonstrated that his species can safely process this substance. The worst-case scenario would be temporary sensory overload followed by complete recovery. Temporary sensory overload, Secretary Gloop repeated slowly, his slime production slowing to what I was beginning to recognize as thoughtful consideration rather than panic. I suppose if the humans survived it, and it would demonstrate that none of us were actually trying to poison anyone, Ambassador Claxon added, his harmonic frequencies shifting to something that almost sounded hopeful. Fine, Highbuzzer Zitrix declared suddenly, her clicking rapid and decisive. If consuming fermented dairy products is a standard human bonding ritual, then Zephyrian diplomatic protocol requires participation in cultural exchange activities. And just like that, we had ourselves a cheese-tasting party. I distributed the pieces, each one carefully sized for what I estimated their respective physiologies could handle. Secretary Gloop examined his portion with the kind of intense scrutiny usually reserved for diffusing bombs. Ambassador Claxon held his piece up to the light, his crystalline structure refracting the dining hall's illumination into tiny rainbows. Highbuzzer Zitrix was vibrating with what I was pretty sure was nervous excitement. On 3, I suggested, holding up my own piece. 1, 2, 3. What happened next was the most beautiful disaster I'd ever witnessed. Secretary Gloop, being a molluscan, basically absorbed his piece of cheese through osmosis. For about 2 seconds, nothing happened. Then his entire body started changing colors like a slime-based light show, cycling through shades of green, purple, and orange I didn't even know existed. His eye stalks shot out to maximum extension and started rotating independently, while he made a sound that can only be described as a foghorn having an existential crisis. "What is happening to my biochemistry?" he wailed, but somehow he sounded more amazed than terrified. "I can taste colors. Is this normal? Why do I suddenly understand the meaning of purple?" Ambassador Claxon's reaction was even more spectacular. The moment the cheese made contact with whatever crystalline Vorthak used for taste receptors, his entire body started resonating like a cosmic tuning fork. The harmonic frequencies he was producing were so complex that the ship's universal translator gave up and just displayed experiencing unprecedented sensory input in 17 different languages. But here's the thing. It sounded like music. Beautiful, crystalline music that made the wine glasses ring in harmony. Highbuzzer Zitrix went completely motionless for exactly 3.7 seconds, which I later learned was the longest any Zephyrian had been still in recorded history. Then she exploded into motion, buzzing around the room at what had to be her maximum velocity while clicking in patterns so rapid they sounded like applause. "Efficiency through fermentation," she buzzed ecstatically, "optimal flavor distribution. Peak sensory achievement. This explains so much about human productivity levels." Dr. Tentacleworth was frantically scanning all 3 of them while trying not to laugh. "Fascinating. Each species is processing the fermented compounds differently, but all showing elevated pleasure responses. Inspector Whiskers, who had been watching this whole scene with the kind of professional detachment that comes from years of seeing weird stuff, finally cracked a smile. Well, I'll be damned. They're all having the same reaction the human did. And that's when it hit me. Here we were, 4 completely different species, all experiencing the same ridiculous, overwhelming, absolutely magnificent response to a simple piece of fermented space cheese. We were sweating, making weird noises, probably looking like we were all having simultaneous medical emergencies, and loving every second of it. You know what? I said, cutting myself another piece. I think this is exactly what diplomacy needed. Less formal protocols and more shared experiences that make everyone look equally ridiculous. Secretary Gloop, still cycling through colors but now at a more sedate pace, slimed over with something that might have been a smile if molluskins had faces. Human Morrison, I believe I understand your species better now. You voluntarily seek out experiences that challenge your sensory limitations as a form of recreation. And you do it together, Ambassador Claxon added, his harmonic frequencies settling into something that sounded almost like contentment. The social bonding occurs through mutual vulnerability and shared intensity. Peak efficacious bonding protocol, High Buzzer Zitrix declared, finally settling down enough to hold a conversation. Consuming challenging substances creates group cohesion through synchronized biochemical responses. Dr. Tentacleworth looked up from his scanners with the kind of expression usually reserved for major scientific breakthroughs. Do you realize what you've just done? You've accidentally created the first documented case of successful, interspecies recreational chemistry. This could revolutionize diplomatic protocols across the galaxy. Inspector Whiskers closed his case file with a decisive snap. Well, this is definitely going in the books as the weirdest successful investigation in my career. Case closed. No assassination attempt, no biological warfare, just a human with excellent taste in fermented dairy products. 3 hours later, we were all sitting around the table, sharing stories and passing around different samples from the exotic food market. The Peace Summit, which had been stalled for weeks, suddenly found its breakthrough moment. Turns out, when you've all survived what you thought was a near-death experience together, negotiating trade agreements and territorial disputes seems pretty manageable. The formal accords were signed the next day, but everyone agreed that the real diplomatic breakthrough had happened when we all stood around making embarrassing noises over cheese. And that's how I accidentally invented what became known throughout the galaxy as aggressive food sharing, the diplomatic protocol where potential adversaries build trust by consuming each other's most challenging cultural delicacies together. It's now standard practice in interspecies negotiations, and I like to think it's made the galaxy a more interesting place to live. Though I still maintain that 17-year-old fermented Altarian milk root cheese is the gold standard for diplomatic ice baking. Nothing says I trust you with my life quite like willingly consuming something that makes you look like you're being electrocuted while experiencing religious enlightenment. The cheese was really that good.